In the village of Kashasha, near Lake Victoria, in what was then Tanganyika, something deeply unsettling began on January 30th, 1962. At the time, Tanganyika was still a young nation, having gained independence only weeks earlier. Life was changing quickly, and uncertainty hung in the air. The event began quietly inside a mission-run girls' boarding school. There was nothing unusual about the morning. Students sat at wooden desks, copying lessons from the blackboard. The air was warm and heavy, typical for a region close to the equator. Teachers moved through the classroom, focused on routine instruction. Everything felt normal. Then, without warning, 3 girls seated near the back of the room began to giggle. At first, it didn't seem important. Students laugh. Teachers expect it. A brief distraction, easily ignored. But the giggling didn't stop. It grew louder, sharper, more intense. The girls tried to cover their mouths. They leaned forward, gripping their desks, but the laughter kept coming. Within minutes, something was clearly wrong. The laughter became violent. The girls clutched their stomachs as if in pain. Tears streamed down their faces. Their breathing turned erratic, broken by gasps and choking sounds. They were no longer laughing because something was funny. They were laughing because they couldn't stop. Other students began to turn around in their seats. Confusion spread across the room. A few girls smiled nervously. And then, almost instinctively, they began to laugh as well, not out of amusement, but because laughter is contagious. Within a very short time, the classroom was filled with uncontrollable laughter. The sound was overwhelming, high-pitched, desperate, relentless. The teacher raised her voice, demanding silence, but her words were swallowed by the noise. Order collapsed. Several students were sent out of the room to see the school nurse. But by the time they reached her office, their condition had worsened. They struggled to stand upright. Their bodies shook with involuntary spasms. Some dropped to the floor, laughing and crying at the same time. The nurse was alarmed. This was not misbehavior. This was not hysteria in the casual sense. These girls were terrified. Some begged for help between bursts of laughter. Others stared at the nurse with wide eyes, unable to speak at all. Their faces showed panic, not joy. As the day continued, the laughter spread. By the afternoon, nearly 2/3 of the school's students had been affected. Attacks varied in length. Some lasted only minutes. Others continued for hours. A girl might stop laughing suddenly, completely drained, only to be overtaken again later without any warning. And laughter was only part of what they experienced. Many students had difficulty breathing. Some screamed or cried uncontrollably. Others fainted from exhaustion. Rashes appeared on their skin, then vanished just as quickly. Several complained of pain throughout their bodies. Many became restless, unable to sit still, pacing back and forth as if their own bodies no longer obeyed them. Teachers tried everything they could think of. They separated the affected students from the others. They called in medical doctors from nearby towns. When medicine failed to provide answers, they turned to religion, inviting priests to pray over the girls. Nothing stopped the attacks. One detail quickly became impossible to ignore. Not a single teacher, not a single staff member, only students. The laughter came in waves. A girl might laugh uncontrollably for 2 hours, then collapse into silence, exhausted and confused. She might sleep normally that night, eat breakfast the next morning, and appear completely fine. Then, without warning, the laughter would seize her again. For some students, these cycles continued for weeks, By mid-March, 6 weeks after the first incident, the situation had become unbearable. Classes could no longer function. Education had effectively stopped. Some girls suffered physical injuries, bruised ribs, sore throats, severe dehydration from being unable to eat or drink during attacks. Others were emotionally broken, afraid to be around their classmates. On March 18, 1962, the school administrators made a painful decision. The school would close. All students were sent home to their villages across the Bukoba region. The hope was simple: remove the girls from the environment where the outbreak began, and the problem would end. But that hope was disastrously misplaced. Within days of the girls returning home, the laughter began again. It appeared in living rooms, in family compounds, in village streets. Parents watched in horror as their daughters collapsed into the same uncontrollable fits they thought had been left behind at school. In the village of Nshamba, 2 former students arrived home on March 20th. 5 days later, nearly 50 people were affected. By April, that number had grown to more than 200. The village descended into chaos. Schools were forced to close. Parents abandoned work to care for affected children. Markets struggled to operate. Normal life slowed, then stopped. And the laughter continued to spread, moving outward from village to village. As doctors and researchers tracked the outbreak, a pattern began to emerge. The laughter almost always affected young people. Adolescents were the most vulnerable. Females were affected far more often than males, students far more than teachers, children far more than adults. And perhaps most importantly, it followed social connections. Families, friendships, schools. Physical distance did not matter. A single visit to relatives could carry the condition into an entirely new community. Medical examinations revealed nothing unusual. Blood tests were normal. There were no signs of infection, no bacteria, no virus, no poison. Yet during severe attacks, patients experienced rapid heart rates, elevated blood pressure, intense sweating, muscle weakness, and in some cases, temporary paralysis. The symptoms were real and deeply frightening. Doctors tried sedatives, muscle relaxants, traditional herbal treatments. Some patients improved temporarily, only to relapse after interacting with others who were affected. 2 researchers, A.M. Rankin and P.J. Phillip, began documenting the epidemic in detail. They traveled from village to village, interviewing families, observing patients, and mapping how the condition spread. What they uncovered would later become one of the most important case studies in medical history. The laughter did not move randomly. It moved along human relationships. And behind every burst of laughter was fear. This was not happiness. Witnesses described the sound as forced, mechanical, deeply unsettling. People laughed until they couldn't breathe, while feeling intense panic and confusion. Some collapsed from exhaustion. Others injured themselves during attacks, falling or striking nearby objects. Families began to fear one another. Some believed the affected were cursed or possessed. Others worried the condition might never end. Young women feared permanent stigma, believing their futures had been damaged by something they couldn't control. What had begun with 3 girls in a classroom had become a regional crisis, and no one yet understood why. As the epidemic expanded beyond the original school, fear began to replace confusion. What had once seemed like an isolated incident was now clearly something far larger. Entire communities were being disrupted by an illness no one could explain. By late March and early April of 1962, reports of uncontrollable laughter were coming from multiple villages across the Bukoba district. In some places, dozens were affected. In others, hundreds. Schools closed one after another as students collapsed into laughter during lessons, unable to concentrate or even remain seated. In the village of Nshamba, the situation became especially severe. After the first cases appeared, the laughter spread rapidly through families and neighbors. Parents who had never attended the boarding school suddenly found themselves affected. Children laughed until they cried. Adults struggled to care for their households while experiencing attacks themselves. Life became unpredictable. A person could appear healthy in the morning, attend chores, walk through the village, and then suddenly collapse into uncontrollable laughter by afternoon. Attacks often lasted hours. When they ended, sufferers were left weak, embarrassed, and emotionally drained. Doctors were overwhelmed. Medical teams moved from village to village, examining patients and attempting to identify a cause. They checked for infectious diseases. They tested water sources. They examined food supplies. Nothing explained what was happening. There was no fever, no inflammation, no evidence of poisoning. Yet the physical symptoms were undeniable. During attacks, patients experienced rapid heartbeat, dangerously elevated blood pressure, heavy sweating, trembling, and muscle weakness. Some temporarily lost the ability to walk. Others were unable to speak at all, their laughter completely overriding voluntary control. This was not imagined illness, but it wasn't behaving like any known disease either. One of the most unsettling features was how selective the epidemic appeared to be. Even in villages where hundreds were affected, certain individuals never developed symptoms at all. Teachers remained unaffected. Many older adults were spared. Meanwhile, adolescents seemed especially vulnerable. As researchers compared case after case, a pattern became increasingly clear. The epidemic followed social pathways. It moved through friendships, through family relationships, through shared spaces like schools and dormitories. It did not spread randomly, and it did not follow physical proximity alone. What mattered most was emotional and social connection. A girl visiting her relatives could unintentionally bring the outbreak with her. Days later, laughter would erupt in a household that had previously been untouched. The Ramashenya Girls' Middle School was forced to close in June after nearly 50 students developed symptoms. Another school in Kanyangareka closed shortly afterward. By the end of the year, 14 schools across the region had shut down entirely. In total, more than 1,000 people were affected across an area spanning roughly 200 miles. Villages were quarantined. Parents kept children at home. Fear spread faster than the laughter itself. For many communities, the emotional toll was devastating. Some families believed the affected were cursed. Others suspected witchcraft or punishment from ancestral spirits. Traditional healers were consulted. Rituals were performed. Animals were sacrificed. When these efforts failed, frustration and despair deepened. Those who suffered the attacks were often treated with suspicion. Some families were avoided entirely. Young women, in particular, faced lasting stigma. Potential suitors feared the laughter might return or be passed on. Isolation became another layer of suffering. Witnesses consistently described the laughter as unnatural. It did not sound joyful. It sounded forced, hollow, almost mechanical. People laughed while begging for it to stop. Some screamed between gasps of laughter. Others sobbed as their bodies betrayed them. In extreme cases, people collapsed from exhaustion. A few injured themselves by falling during attacks or striking nearby objects. Some bit their tongues or injured their jaws from prolonged spasms. As weeks turned into months, doctors began to reconsider their approach. If this was not caused by infection or toxins, then perhaps the origin was psychological. This led researchers to a diagnosis that, at the time, was deeply misunderstood: mass psychogenic illness. Often referred to historically as mass hysteria, this condition occurs when psychological stress manifests as real physical symptoms within a group. The symptoms are not faked. They are not imagined. The suffering is genuine, but there is no physical pathogen driving the illness. And Tanganyika in 1962 was a nation under immense stress. The country had only recently gained independence from British colonial rule. Traditional social structures were being challenged. Western education systems were rapidly expanding. Young people, especially girls, were navigating conflicting expectations from family, culture, and authority figures. Boarding schools became pressure cookers. Students were separated from their families. Instruction was often conducted in unfamiliar languages. Discipline was strict. Expectations were high, and emotional expression was limited. For adolescents already dealing with the confusion of growing up, the psychological burden was enormous. When the first 3 girls began laughing, researchers believe it may have been an unconscious release of pent-up tension. Others, already stressed and emotionally vulnerable, may have responded in kind. Fear amplified the response, suggestion reinforced it, and soon the behavior spread through shared experience. This explanation did not bring immediate comfort. Many people struggled to accept that stress alone could cause such intense physical symptoms. But history offered precedent. Throughout the centuries, similar outbreaks had occurred. In medieval Europe, there were dancing plagues where people danced uncontrollably for days or weeks, collapsing from exhaustion. In convents, groups of nuns had outbreaks of meowing, barking, or biting behaviors that spread rapidly through communities. In modern times, schools around the world have experienced sudden waves of fainting, twitching, or unexplained illness among students. Each case followed a familiar pattern: stress, social connection, physical symptoms without a medical cause. What made Tanganyika different was scale, duration, and documentation. The epidemic lasted 18 months. It crossed enormous geographic distances, and it was carefully recorded by medical professionals who took the suffering seriously rather than dismissing it outright. As understanding slowly improved, the epidemic began to lose some of its power. Fear lessened, social networks were disrupted by school closures, communities adapted. Gradually, fewer new cases appeared. By mid-1963, the laughter was fading. Villages began to return to normal. Schools reopened cautiously. Families tried to rebuild routines. The epidemic did not end suddenly. It simply burned out. Researchers believe several factors contributed. The closure of schools reduced opportunities for spread. Increased awareness reduced fear. Social stability slowly returned as the nation adjusted to independence. And eventually, the population susceptible to the phenomenon was exhausted. But while the laughter ended, its impact did not. The memories remained vivid for those who lived through it. Parents remembered the helplessness. Children remembered the fear. Communities remembered the tension and division. And for medical science, Tanganyika became a turning point. The epidemic demonstrated that mass psychogenic illness could be prolonged, geographically widespread, and socially devastating. It showed that psychological phenomena deserved serious medical attention, and it highlighted the limits of treating human suffering without understanding cultural and social context. the story was not over, because even decades later, questions remained. And the mystery of why laughter, of all possible symptoms, had taken hold, still lingered. Even after the laughter faded, the questions remained. Why laughter, of all possible physical responses to stress? Why did the human mind choose something so paradoxical, something normally associated with joy? Researchers struggled with this question for decades. Laughter, unlike crying or screaming, occupies a strange space in human behavior. It can express happiness, discomfort, fear, or social bonding. It can be voluntary or completely involuntary. Under extreme stress, it may become a reflex, a release valve for emotions that have nowhere else to go. In Tanganyika, that reflex turned into a trap. Some researchers suggested that laughter was particularly powerful because it spread so easily. Hearing someone laugh triggers a response deep in the brain, often before conscious thought. In an environment filled with anxiety and uncertainty, that reflex may have overridden rational control, turning stress into something audible, visible, and terrifying. Another mystery was immunity. Even in the most affected schools and villages, some individuals never developed symptoms. They lived alongside those who laughed uncontrollably, cared for them, slept in the same homes, and yet remained unaffected. Why? No clear answer exists. It may have involved personality differences, coping mechanisms, emotional resilience, or even subtle social positioning within the group. The epidemic also raised the uncomfortable possibility of environmental influence. Some researchers wondered whether something in the water or food supply increased susceptibility, not as a direct cause, but as a stressor that lowered psychological defenses. No evidence ever confirmed this theory, but it also was never fully ruled out. The absence of proof left room for speculation, and the mystery endured. What was clear, however, was the human cost. It is easy to reduce the Tanganyika laughter epidemic to statistics. More than 1,000 affected, 14 schools closed, 18 months of disruption. But each number represents a person who experienced fear, loss of control, and social isolation. Imagine being one of the first girls. You are sitting in class, following instructions when your body betrays you. You try to stop laughing. You can't. Your classmates stare. The teacher becomes frustrated. You feel shame, fear, confusion. And then others begin to laugh too. You don't feel relief. You feel horror. Whatever is happening to you is now happening to everyone. Imagine being a parent. Your child collapses into uncontrollable laughter, tears pouring down her face. She begs you to make it stop. You take her to doctors who find nothing wrong. You turn to traditional healers who offer explanations but no cure. You lie awake at night, listening to her breathing, waiting for the next attack. Imagine being a teacher. Your classroom becomes a place of fear instead of learning. You watch your students scatter to villages across the region, knowing some of them may carry this strange affliction with them. You close your school, unsure if it will ever reopen. These experiences left scars. Some people developed long-term anxiety. Others became withdrawn. Families remembered who avoided them during the outbreak. Communities remembered who was blamed. Trust was damaged in ways that statistics cannot measure. For medical science, the epidemic reshaped understanding. Before Tanganyika, mass psychogenic illness was often dismissed as attention-seeking or weakness. The detailed documentation by researchers like A.M. Rankin and P.J. Phillip proved otherwise. They showed that these outbreaks follow identifiable patterns. They spread through social networks. They affect vulnerable populations. They produce real physical symptoms, and they can persist far longer than anyone expects. modern public health responses now reflect these lessons. When similar outbreaks occur today, experts look for underlying stressors. They manage communication carefully to avoid panic. They emphasize reassurance instead of confrontation. They address both the physical symptoms and the social conditions that allow such phenomena to spread. Yet the relevance of Tanganyika extends beyond medicine. In today's hyper-connected world, social contagion moves faster than ever. Fear spreads through news cycles and social media. Symptoms, behaviors, and beliefs can propagate instantly across continents. The same psychological mechanisms that fueled the laughter epidemic still exist, amplified by technology. In recent years, there have been documented cases of unexplained tics spreading among teenagers through online platforms. Communities reporting shared symptoms after perceived environmental threats. Panic traveling faster than any virus. The tools have changed. The human mind has not. The Tanganyika laughter epidemic forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. We like to believe we are fully rational, fully in control, but under the right conditions, stress and uncertainty can override reason. The boundary between mind and body is thinner than we would like to admit. For the people of the Bukoba region, the epidemic became part of collective memory. Even decades later, elders speak of it cautiously. Some laugh nervously while telling the story, as if afraid that recalling it too vividly might summon it back. Others grow quiet, remembering the fear, the confusion, the sense that reality itself had become unstable. Today, the schools are open. The villages have grown and changed. The generation that lived through the epidemic is aging. Their grandchildren know the story as legend, something strange that happened long ago, but the questions remain alive. Could it happen again? In a different form? In a different place? Under different pressures? Most researchers believe the answer is yes, not because history repeats itself exactly, but because human psychology does. The epidemic was not supernatural. It was not a curse. It was not mass deception. It was a real medical phenomenon born from stress, cultural tension, and social connection, unfolding at a moment when an entire society was in transition. The laughter ended, but its echo remains. It reminds us that the human mind can create symptoms as real as any disease, that communities can share fear as easily as they share joy. And that understanding health requires more than biology. It requires empathy, context, and humility. The Tanganyika laughter epidemic stands as one of the most unsettling events in medical history, not because it defies explanation, but because it reveals how fragile our sense of control truly is. Reality, under pressure, can bend in unexpected ways. And sometimes that bending sounds like laughter.